Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Brisbane Complete Street Safety Committee for Wednesday, August 3rd, 2022. The time is 6:30 p.m. This meeting is compliant with the Governor's Executive Order N-29-20 issued on March 17th, 2020, allowing for deviation of teleconferencing rules required by the Brown Act. The purpose of this is to provide the safest environment for staff, committee members, and the public while allowing for public participation. The public may participate via a Zoom web link and/or by phone or by using remote public comment options. The committee may take action on any item listed on the agenda. Public meeting videos. Members of the public may view the Complete Street Safety Committee meetings by logging into the Zoom meeting site listed below. Complete Street Safety Committee meetings can also be viewed live and or on demand via the city's YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/Brisbane CA, or on Comcast Channel 27. Archived videos can be replayed on the city's website, http://brisbaneca.org/meetings. Joined by Zoom. Topic: Complete Street Safety Committee meeting. Time: August 3rd, 2022, 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time, US and Canada. www.brisbanecA.org/CSSC-Zoom. The meeting ID is 976-095-7422, and the passcode is 747389. You can also join by phone by calling 1-669-900-9128. The meeting ID is 976-095-7422. To address the committee. When an item you are interested in appears on the agenda, you may address the committee at that time. If the matter you are interested in is not on the committee's agenda, but is a matter that is within the committee's subject matter jurisdiction, you may address it under public comment. Remote public comments. Meeting participants are encouraged to submit public comments in writing in advance of the meeting. The following email will be monitored during the meeting, and public comments received will be read into the record during oral communications or during an item. That email is tsantoyo@ci.brisbane.ca.us. We go to the next page. Special assistance. If you need special assistance to participate in this meeting, please contact Tomas Santoyo at the email I just gave, tsantoyo@brisbaneca.org, or a telephone number 415-508-2100. Notification in advance of the meeting will enable the city to make reasonable arrangements to ensure accessibility to this meeting. Okay, let's get started then. I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. And could we start with having a roll call?
Yeah, I can do it.
Andy?
I can go for it.
Okay.
Good. Detmer?
Here.
Oh, no, I was supposed to go alphabetically, but I already messed it up. Cabrera?
Here.
Wozniak?
Here.
Painter?
Here.
And Strecker?
Here.
For those of you who have attended our meetings in the past, you know we have a new member, and I'd like to formally welcome him to the committee. Gregory Strecker is joining us for the first time. Thank you for joining the committee. We appreciate your volunteering, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very much looking forward to working with this committee.
Welcome.
Welcome. Welcome.
Welcome. Okay. We have the agenda as set before us. Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
I make a motion to adopt the agenda.
I'll second that.
Okay. Do we need a roll call, or can we just, Karen, or can we just raise hands?
No,
on that?
I'm told that on these remote meetings, we need to roll call everything except adjournment,
Okay.
I guess.
All right. Could we do a roll call? Yeah. Thank you.
Want me to take it over, Tomas, or are you still?
Here, I'll give you this one.
Okay, Cabrera.
I
Here.
don't see Tomas.
Aye. Detmer.
Here. Aye.
Strecker.
Aye.
Tainter.
Aye.
And Wadzak.
Aye.
All right. We have an agenda.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Oral communications. Do we have any members of the public here in attendance who would like to address the committee on something that is not on our agenda?
No emails, no calls so far, and I'm keeping an eye on the chat. Nothing yet.
Okay. All right. Looks like all 10 attendees are related to the committee. Okay. All right. Any, okay. Let's look at then approving the minutes from our last meeting, July 6, 2022. I'm sure we've all had a chance to review that. First of all, are there any changes, additions, deletions? Yes, Linda?
My name was left off, and I'm pretty sure I was at the July meeting. I read it over, and it all looked very familiar to me, but my attendance is not included.
Okay, thanks for letting me know. I'll make sure to add that in.
Sure.
Yes, we both overlooked that.
Yeah.
Any other changes? All right. Could I then have a motion to accept the minutes with the change that noted by Linda?
I make a motion. Oh, go ahead, Darius.
Sure, I'll make the motion to accept minutes with additions.
I'll second.
Okay. Could I have a second?
I'll
Linda,
second.
Okay. Thank you. Let's
So
have
roll
roll
call.
call on that, please.
Cabrera. Christian Cabrera. Is he on mute? I'm not seeing everyone because I'm on my iPad, so
I'm not either.
I can't tell who's muted. Christian?
He's on mute at the moment.
Oh.
I see him talking, but
We can come back to him.
Detmer,
Yeah, aye.
Strecker, and I think you can abstain having not been at the meeting.
I'll abstain.
There's Christian.
Tainter,
Aye. Sorry
aye.
about that.
and Wadzak.
Aye.
And Christian Cabrera?
Aye.
Thank you.
Out of curiosity, is anybody's audio really laggy, or is it just mine?
I'm hearing everything all right.
I'm hearing everything all right now. That
I'm hearing it okay. It just lags at times. Okay. You can hear me okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. All right. let's move on to old business, which is our standing project. Investigation of residential parking program for Central Brisbane. As you recall, at our last meeting, we had started to go through looking at different policy or different ways of implementing the various aspects of that. And our take-home assignment was to go through that and kind of put some notes to it in preparation for this meeting, maybe being able to then to speed things up and such. Now, so we'll do that. It's on screen again. I will warn you though that I have changed the order. So your notes may not match up and see all the topics are the same and all the subheadings are the same. I just moved them around so that I thought we should address some things before we addressed other things. For instance, I thought, should it be what parking zones covered, how many permits to issue? We should be addressing those before we get into how it's going to be enforced. And because I think they're more foundational questions. So the order has changed here a little bit, but still all the questions, all the data points are exactly the same. So the parking zones actually on the printout, if you printed it out from the last meeting, was the third one down. Okay. And so what we're looking at is there's a lot that goes into this in terms of whether we set it up as just citywide or Central Brisbane wide, same permit works the same everywhere, or we set up zones. And if we were to set up zones, how do we do that? So I'm going to open it up for everyone to have their comments, and let's have discussions and put our thoughts into this. And I see us going through these over the next several meetings. Hopefully we can get at least one major area decided at a meeting. I think that would be a great accomplishment. But we may have to, if we decide something, say tonight on something, I think we'll still keep it open to revisit it and review it before we make a final recommendation to council. And, but at least it gets us in a kind of funneled down from a bunch of choices to just maybe one or two at the end of our discussions. If we don't agree on anything tonight, then that's okay too. We'll continue on our discussions. Is there someone who'd like to lead off in terms of talking about? Go ahead.
I just have one comment. I wanted to say, we didn't put an easy place or a logical place on the agenda for Gregory, but I think on his turn, we did have kind of a brief orientation, and we tried to get him a little bit up to speed on what we were working on with this parking permit proposal. And he had some interesting experiences in other cities. So I think when it gets to his turn, he should tell the committee what, I think it's relevant to what we're working on.
Okay, great.
Do you want me to talk now, or should I wait?
Who would like to lead off?
I guess, should I talk now or should I wait till later?
You've got the floor. I've got a green box around your picture.
All right. Yeah, so I was able to have, as Karen said, I was able to have, get some fill. Just so you know, for myself, obviously new to the committee, I excited to join and then definitely excited to share my experience as well. Some of the recently moved to Brisbane in December. Prior to that, I lived in Pacifica for actually 3 years, but right on the border of Pacifica and Daly City. And so some of the things we talked about, and actually, currently I live actually right here, across the street from the community park, the condominiums over there in one of the condos. That's where, and so some experience, at least in the centralized part right here with parking, having parked, I have to park one car on the street. So that definitely gives me some experience there. But some of the things I know that Karen brought up too, that we talked about, is just my experience with parking, for example, in Brisbane, or not in Brisbane, I'm sorry, in Pacifica and Daly City, since it was a recent experience over there. Daly City has a street cleaning program, which I am sure you guys, I'm not sure if the research you guys have had, but definitely was something I experienced due to the fact that I lived right on the border with Daly City. And so sometimes would have to park in that section, in the Daly City part, in order, to find parking, because Pacifica does not have a permit parking program and is pretty absent in terms of, at least in the area I lived in terms of the parking, although they do have an RV type ordinance in place, which was something that was instituted while I was living there as well, because they had a big issue with RVs parking permanently in areas. And so there were some restrictions related to that. In terms of my experience with parking within Brisbane so far, for most part, I'm actually able to find parking for the most part. I think the biggest issues that I have tend to be on, for where I live, on farmers market evenings, when I get back from work on farmers market evenings, trying to find parking within where I usually park, which usually I'm able to park on San Bruno Avenue or San Francisco Avenue, right here. But every once in a while, I sometimes have to move over to Visitation to find parking during those farmers market days, or sometimes during the weekends when the park's full and there's a lot always going on in the park. So just wanted to share some of that. I'm not sure if that helps, what kind of research we have done before, because it's being my first time. I tried to get brushed up a little bit in terms of the notes and what you guys have been looking at before. But definitely want to be able, provide my insight, at least with my experience before. And one thing I will say related to the street cleaning thing is it was a great way to force people to move their cars. So obviously you had to move every week, otherwise you would get the ticket. Unfortunately, I was one of the culprits of the tickets one time, and then I didn't want to do it ever again after that. But that was also an issue, the time of day. You had to be up at a certain time, get to your car at a certain time to move it, in the hope that, you could beat the street cleaners over there. So, and then, the good thing, of course, with Pacifica was the fact you didn't have to worry too much about parking there for a long period of time. However, sometimes it was harder to find parking. So that was an issue as well.
Thank you, Gregory. I have a couple questions from what you mentioned. You said you got a parking ticket or two from Daly City. How much is their parking fine?
That's a good question. At the time, I think it was $40 at the time. That was
okay.
a couple of years ago. So it might be more now. I don't know at this point. But definitely, it wasn't very expensive, but obviously not something I wanted to get again. Yeah.
Right. And then you mentioned you sometimes park on Visitation. So can you park on that overnight, or do you have to go move your car again, like after?
Actually, I can. I actually was surprised by that as well, because Visitation, at least closer towards my intersection with the five-way, our famous five-way intersection right here.
Yeah.
At least the areas I'm usually able to park in front of the senior center. There's usually parking right there on Visitation, or right across the street, right in front of the hardware store. But there's nothing there, at least posted for not being able to park overnight. And I've done it a few times, and it's always been okay. Yeah, I know the one area I've seen, at least near where I have to park, that has any sort of restrictions that's posted I've seen is on the San Bruno Avenue on the east side. So going up the hill from the community park, right next to the hardware store, there's a Wednesday's street cleaning sign. And it says from like 9 a.m. till, I believe it says till noon on there.
Yeah.
We've historically not ticketed on San Bruno, and
Yeah.
it's not very
Which Karen
effective.
mentioned has
Nobody moves.
Has historically not been ticketed. Although I always move it. I always make sure I'm not parked there on Wednesdays because I see that sign.
Well, that's appreciated.
Yeah. All right. Who'd like to give us some thoughts next? I can go alphabetical. Linda, are you wagging your head?
I submitted my notes and don't have a copy of them in front of me without switching screens. And mine are probably way out of order and not in sync with the changes here. My sense, my bottom line sense when I delivered my notes was that it felt like it's real difficult to do this without already starting to find preferences instead of investigating. There's like instant preferences that I had about how's this going to be paid for, that sort of thing. So it was hard not to put them in an order in my mind as to what I thought would be the best practice, and then the second best, and the next best. But again, I don't have my documents. So I'm going to sit back and listen for now. That's all right.
Christian, how about yourself? Talking whether zones or citywide and such, do you have thoughts on that?
So the well, I mean, first of all, welcome, Gregory, and thank you for the for the feedback you gave us. I have one question for you. So you live in the building across the community park, right?
Yes. Yep.
So that's actually an interesting scenario because I don't think there's that many buildings in Brisbane, and we were also at one point wondering how that works when you have building. How many units you think that building has?
Well, I know all that information. So it's a 16-unit building, 16 total units. I believe off the top, there's some units that are two bedrooms, some units that are 1 bedrooms. And in terms of parking, there is a garage within the building. And so depending on, on the base floor of the building. So depending on the unit, and it all had to do with the original owners of the unit, they were titled certain parking spots in the garage. So in terms of myself, the unit I purchased, we have 1 spot that's titled within the garage, which, we have a 2-bedroom and it's me and my partner, but of course each of us, well, I shouldn't say of course, but each of us does have a car because we both commute different parts. And so these one car is always parked in the garage, one's car is usually parked on the street. Yeah, that's a good question.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean that seems to be a typical scenario. I guess from people that I know that live in apartments, if you have like a 1-bedroom, they will assign you 1 spot. If you have 2 bedrooms, maybe 2 spots, and most likely, with a 1-bedroom, there's going to be 2 people that drive. So the other person has to go and find a parking spot outside the building.
And it is a little different with this building just because it's all owners, or not all owners, some renters as well. But but in terms of the garage parking, at least here, it's titled from the original owners who purchased the condos. So some units have multiple parking spots within the garage, which actually some of them are not using. Sometimes I talk to them about it. I'm trying to figure out a way if I can, like, hey, can I use that, that parking? Haven't gotten there yet since I've only, been here now for 8 months now. Ooh, okay. But haven't gotten to that point yet, but there are a few spots I've noticed that are not using. So
I
trying to
see.
see if I can use those spots. But as I said, they are titled to those units.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I mean, thanks again for sharing that. That's
Okay.
pretty good insight. I mean, so in terms of the parking permit zones, there's two ways to look at this. One of them is all the technicality that that I think we gather from the different cities, like the minimum number of dwelling. So I guess what they're asking here is if there's like an apartment building and it has X amount of units, but is going to have a spill of parking outside their apartment building, so they're going to be tagged with a zone, and they're going to have that zone in their sticker for their parking permit. So I think that's one way to look at that. But then also you have once again, Gregory, I think this section was made for you. And then once again, you have somebody like Gregory that is going to be parking, in areas that is public, like the community park, and also in areas that are business, like the visitation. So then all that does that becomes like one zone, and try to accommodate these different criterias of people that need to park and the times. I mean, the other way that I looked at it was like the way like in Mariposa where I live, Mariposa Street is a tight. They're tight in terms of the parking spaces, but then Solano has a lot of spaces available. So then, if you have more than 2 cars, because usually you could park 2 cars in front of your house. If you have like 3 cars, and then you could go park on Solano. So then you could zone that and say, you know what, let's get Mariposa and maybe the next street, and with Solano, then we say that's zone A. And then the people in Mariposa that could go and park on Solano if they have more than 2 cars. And then that's excuse me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
So that was one way to look at it, So, but then at the end of that section, it says, do we hold a vote to to want to have that's the part that I didn't understand, to get a parking zone, or also can people organize each other and let's say Gregory among other people and say, you know what, why don't we get a zone where it covers the community park, the business visitation, or some other areas, and we put a vote, and all those people, if you get more than 70%, then we'll get this as a zone. So that I was confused about these parking permit parking zones, to be honest.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Christian. Darius, any thoughts?
Yeah, I
Or
guess.
what are your thoughts?
Sure. I guess to kind of maybe address Christian's point there, I guess I kind of took this as sort of maybe I think Tomas put this document together to kind of list out all the options. But I guess to agree, sort of the vote, maybe not confusing. Oh, sorry, can you hear me? Oh.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was
Yes.
just saying, the voting, I agree also. I guess I was kind of thinking if it's a general election vote, then I think there's sort of rules around how to, determine votes per household or whatnot. I don't know if this is something that I guess that's something that we leave to the council down the road. But yeah, I think sort of the question on how to define parking permit zones, is something that we thought about last time too. And I guess one thing I kind of struggled with as I went through this document is I guess I couldn't find, for example, some of the data and maybe like the original map that Tomas showed. Was that somewhere in the SharePoint? Or so? Because I think he kind of, had mapped out some proposed zones. which I thought were quite interesting. And I couldn't find those on the SharePoint there. And I was wondering if maybe there's somewhere else where we're holding some of these, earlier research that's been done to help us. And then I agree with Linda in terms of I had some, innate preferences in a lot of these, and I stack ranked them. But I guess in this particular area, I sort of, I didn't have as strong feelings as, for example, the number of spots or the cost area. So I think that's sort of, some thoughts I had on this part particularly.
Okay. Okay. I guess I'll go next. I think I'm the last one then. I guess the way I looked at this starting out was in terms of zones. Some of the cities we looked at seemed to break up their parking, their city into different zones, and a permit would apply to, some shaped area with so many streets inside. And then an adjacent area would have a different permit. People could not jump between permits or jump between zones with their permit. I mean, I think that's what kind of this was. That's how I interpreted this as aiming towards trying to resolve. And we did talk about this last time. I get concerned. We're a small enough city and the streets are small enough that if you are, say, on the edge of a zone, if you're at a boundary, if you're in the middle of the zone, you can go a full circle around where you live to find a parking space, 360 degrees. You can go in all directions. But if you live at the edge of the zone, you can only you can't go to the zone next door. So you have less opportunity to potentially find a parking space and not get a ticket if we do zones than somebody who's in the middle. So my thought was we should just make the entire area, make it citywide. That was my thought in terms of if we're going to recommend. Well, council has asked for a recommendation how to put together a permit program. So that would be my thought, is that it should be just central Brisbane wide, and a permit allows you to park on Kings, it allows you to park on Mariposa, Solano, wherever, San Bruno, wherever, Tulare. This one permit would allow you to park anywhere, rather than trying to break it up into separate zones. And I think, it's a bit like musical chairs coming home. And if you take away if you do zones, I feel like you take away some of the open chairs potentially, and say you can't use those chairs, and they may remain open and unused because the people who could use them do not have a permit for that particular zone.
I would kind of
comments.
Yeah, I would kind of I would agree with that. I would say, just from hearing and listening about, in terms of the zone, as you kind of said, with with Brisbane being such a small city, and as you said, those people on the edges of those zones might have more trouble. But I think if we make it just like a central Brisbane wide permit program, so obviously not I don't think we're including the Ridge, I believe, right up on the hillside.
Right.
And because they don't have too many parking issues from what it sounds like there. But and it's interesting too with central Brisbane, the zone, it depends on the area, as you said. If you're on one street, it's super tight and really busy with lots of cars parked, and then you might go to a street or two down, and there's a little more space to be able to park. So I kind of agree. I think the central Brisbane idea, I think, is a good way to go versus separate zones. Maybe one separate zone would be visitation, just because of the businesses there. Might have a different rule, for guest parking, for example, is more available on visitation, just so that businesses can get people to park there, and have parking for those businesses.
Mm-hmm. Do, Gregory, are you home at all during work days? Do you work from home by chance or?
Unfortunately, no.
I'm,
I'm mostly gone
okay.
during the
I'm,
day.
I'm curious about
But just-
spillover from visitation onto residential street. I was just wondering if you had observed that or not.
Unfortunately, not that I've observed. I think the biggest, at least where I'm at, what I've observed the most is impact from the park more than anything else in terms of parking.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, if there's any kind of event or any kind of thing going on within the park, at least where I'm at, it's you know, it's usually the park. And in fact, most of the time, if there is open spaces during those events, it's usually on visitation, actually, where you can find
Right.
parking.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And Patrick, if I may,
Any other thoughts on? Yes.
hi. I really agree with what you had to say. I think it speaks to a couple of things, not just the border parking, but also to visiting friends in a neighborhood that's not your zone. I agree that we need to have just one zone, maybe we could call it. I don't know, an area where we can all pretty much go to a friend's house and not have to worry about a parking permit that's not in that zone. It alleviates a lot of the questions I had before about what if you're staying with a friend for the day because they're ill and other needs and things that change. And so I have to agree that not zoning the entire town in different zones is a good idea.
Okay. Thank you, Linda. Any other? Yeah, Darius.
Yeah, I definitely agree in terms of Brisbane is too small for too many zones. But then I also wonder, does one zone then solve the problem that we're having? Or I guess, you know, because the thing I keep coming back is, what is the fundamental issue we're trying to address with the parking permit program? If it's number of cars on an individual street, then I guess just having a permit, you'll still have the same congestion if everyone's permitted, unless we limit the number of permits per household then, or some other limitation. But I guess in my view, I agree that we should not have too many zones, but then having just one big zone, I guess as long as you're a resident, you can park anywhere. And I guess that would only take away the problem where non-residents are parking on our streets. I'm not sure that's the major problem. I don't know, maybe it is. And I haven't seen the statistics for that. I know the one thing that keeps coming to mind is when we had asked about the number of cases of people parking here and then going like SFO or something. That was, you know, one case in the last 10 years, or, you know, very little. And so I agree that limiting zones is a good idea, but I wonder whether that even addresses the issue at hand. Or yeah, so that keeps coming back in my mind, I guess, to try to figure out what that core problem.
Well, in addition to the zoning and all the other things, this is just one small piece of the puzzle, is how many zones to have in general. But I just lost my train of thought. I'll come back.
Come back.
Sorry.
Come back.
So Pat, I think you know, I do agree with you and what Darius is saying. It looks like, you know, you are building consensus here that, you know, Brisbane is too small to have you know, multiple zones, and then it's going to be complicated, you know, to enforce it too, right? So
Yes,
so that
that's
type.
true.
So if you're going to roll out so I guess two questions here. One would be in terms of the process of what we're doing now. We're going to put, let's say, permit parking zones for a vote on what we feel, you know, is the right approach. That's one question. And then the other question, I'm not sure if this is related to this, but if you're going to submit the whole town into a, you know, parking permit program, it looks like other cities, they did a outreach to the public and they put it on a ballot to vote for the citizen to vote. So is that going to
Yes,
be
yeah.
part of this?
I think that's up to us to recommend and then for council to decide. But I think, the last recommendation, when we sent the recommendation to council last year, we recommended that they put it to a city vote permit program. I'm of the same mind as I was at that time, but as a committee, we may feel differently. I don't know. So on a citywide vote. Darius?
I guess did council give a reason for why they did not like that or did not go with that suggestion at the time? Did they just want more research, or I guess what was the follow up to that?
Well, I think they felt as I'm recalling, and Karen, I think you were at the meeting, right? So chime in here, but my recollection as watching the video was that they felt this problem has been around for decades, and it's just time to do something now. They didn't say they were. If I remember correctly, they felt the council will make a decision on this, and because a vote a public vote would just delay it, depending on when the council finishes their recommendation, and have to wait for the next municipal election, which could be 2 years away. So I think they felt it was a more pressing problem. Karen, what do you recall?
I think, the committee brought, can you hear me okay? Brought
Yes.
a couple of, like a 3-phased program, and they wanted to go straight to a parking permit program. The other ideas didn't really sit well with them, or they didn't think they were effective or the best use of time, I guess. And I don't know if I can describe every problem. Different council members had different feedback, and maybe they live in different places of town. Certainly, they probably haven't talked to the majority of constituents about this, so they have their own particular knowledge. But people, 25-foot lots, some people have no parking on site on their own property because of, how their home was built and the slopes and everything. And so some people park multiple cars, they store vehicles on the street, they don't drive them or move them very often. I guess it's very challenging. I don't know if they said it was challenging for them to park, or members of their family, or guests, or whichever the situation is. But then remember that our study did show that the capacity at that dinner hour that we collected data was like the lowest was 80%, but the average was like in the 90s, and in some cases 100% full on the street. So it was, I think, mostly a matter of, there just aren't a lot of spaces available. And I guess for the most part, people are maybe figuring out somewhere to park, but there's just, they drive by and they see this car that doesn't move, and they think, well, that would be a lot more convenient if I could park near my home,
Mm-hmm.
So, and they had different ideas, they think, and I think that's kind of what the committee is wrestling with, is that there are some localized areas that are worse than others. You've got Tulare, a long, narrow, dead-end street, and you drive down that street and can hardly get through because there are cars seemingly all over. But in other spots, maybe it's not as bad, like Christian's saying on Solano, there's some more availability. We didn't study necessarily, we didn't count spaces on either one of those, but they talked about the fact that the problem was localized, but they didn't like the idea of having localized permit areas because then it would just move the problem somewhere else. Which I think supports doing all
Say
of
that
Central
last
Brisbane.
one again, Karen.
They think if you had a permit program, as the Muni Code is written, and I think Linda made a comment about this, that you could have 10 people could sign up and have a zone, but then that's just going to move the problem 10 houses down.
Yes.
So they kind of gave it back to the committee with like, come up with specific recommendations for a program. Let's do this. People have said they want it. Let's put something out there.
Okay. Linda? Thank you, Karen.
Yes, thank you, Karen. Because that reminded me what my hiccup was and where I was going with my train of thought, Darius. We talked about the number of cars that would still remain on the street, regardless of what we did. But there actually is another piece to that, and that is that we are encouraging people to empty their garages and use them. And, you know, I think at some point I know this is all kind of in the brainstorm period, but we did discuss if they had a garage that was usable for parking and they did not use it, then they would have to pay for a parking permit if they were on the street. But it's still spaghetti. It's all mixed up and we need to kind of noodle it out. But yeah, a lot of people will be able to get cars off the street that have garages, and those that don't or can't use their garages are the ones that will be affected by the parking program much more. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Gregory?
I guess one question I was kind of thinking of is related to the permit program that we're discussing. If you were to get a permit, this is just, I mean, I know it's all this discussion. But if you were to get the permit, but the idea being like 2-hour parking for everyone else type of idea, or half-day parking, 1-day parking, 2-day parking, or, you know, that type of idea. And then if not, you have to have a permit, right? If you're going to be there longer, is the idea, right?
It's a good question. We haven't gotten into all
4-hour
the
parking,
details
I don't
yet,
know.
but it seems like other cities do like limited to 2 hours. And I think we may be thinking the problem is an overnight problem, maybe not. Maybe it's a 24-hour problem. But certainly it's, you know, from the evening, people coming home from work and trying to put the car somewhere, you know, get in the house and chill, right? Christian?
Yeah, so I think you know, for the sake of time and also to be more targeted, a lot of what we discuss, you know, it's in the other sections. And so my guess would be
Yes.
if, you know, if we could wrap up the you know, the permit parking zones, and then also if whatever we end up you know, the consensus that we build today and vote on it, that doesn't mean that it's going to be set on stone. I guess we could always come back if somebody feels strongly about
Right.
it and,
That's
and,
right.
and wants to make the case. But it's my I think my opinion would be to stay with the document. It's a very comprehensive one. We, you know, staff put it together from different cities, and it has all the different points that we're going to be discussing or want to make decisions on.
Okay. Thank you. I agree 100%. Is it fair? Am I accurate in saying that we have a consensus that it should be a citywide, excluding the Ridge zone? Is that our consensus? I don't think we need a formal vote, but because, you know, we should finalize things later. But is that our consensus that we would put in the minutes that at the moment we think the permit should be a citywide permit?
But when you
I
say
think that's
citywide,
different.
you're meaning, sorry, central Brisbane, right? Because we also have, you know, Industrial Avenue and Main Street and some other.
Central Brisbane residential.
Well, central residential Brisbane, yeah. And maybe we include visitation because, I mean, it depends on what hours we apply this to, right? If it's overnight parking, then include visitation, I would think would be acceptable, right? Maybe the
I think to
hours would be
begin
different
with-
to allow for the Elks Club. What's that?
I was just going to interject. I think to begin with, if we can just identify the area And if we need to treat visitation separately later, that's good, but we'll have made a giant step forward by
Okay.
identifying where
Okay.
our focus should be.
Yeah, I
I'm in
mean, I do
agreement.
agree. I do agree to try to have a sort of a narrow scope, say Central Brisbane residential, because I don't think we had an opportunity to get feedback from the business's owner. But also in this section, I will add
Yes.
in terms of having a Central Brisbane residential permit parking program. If we are advocating for this to be put on a vote later on, because it's affecting a lot of people.
That's a separate issue,
Yes.
I think. The voting is a separate issue. It certainly needs to be addressed, but I thought you were advocating that we decide if we're going to have one central zone or several. And I thought the consensus we were making here was that we were going to treat Central Brisbane as a zone. And my input was, for now, visitation should be included in that, even though we may treat it differently later, just so that we have, maybe not a giant step, but a baby step towards what our recommendations will be and where we'll be working from. We don't need to get down to the minute details right now.
I don't know if it's worth, Tomas, or if you have it handy, the map that you did of the zones, because when he drafted that, we looked at it in terms of the boundaries, and I thought he should take Central Brisbane, San Bruno, the backside of San Bruno out, because there isn't any street parking really available back there.
Okay. Once you get over the crest, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Once you crest the hill?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you had put in your notes, Bayshore. I guess the only thing is that would be relevant to it is the trailer part, the mobile home part. I don't know that is there other.
So they have quite a bit of street parking in front, right?
Right.
And we have, do they have a lot of issues
Parallel
with parking at the trailer
Or
park
sorry,
there?
nose in.
Sorry, yeah, and I don't think we've heard anything specific about them having issues with their parking. So I guess I'd suggest that we not try to fold that into. It doesn't seem
Okay.
like it was part of what we intended to study.
Again, that's not Central Brisbane, is that considered?
No, I
Central
think
Brisbane?
I think it's not technically.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I had just seen, I don't know if I put it on the list originally or you did, but so everybody's in agreement then.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay. Great. So the consent, let me just restate our consensus. The consensus is that Central Residential Brisbane should be a single, under a permit program, a single parking zone. And that would include, at the moment, that would include visitation and go all the way up the hill in all sides up to the crest. On San Bruno, it would stop at the crest. Is that how we all feel?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, and excluding the industrial park, yeah, in the ridge.
Yes. Yeah. Christian,
Well, but
are you on board with that? I see Daria's nodding. Yeah.
I think that the visitation is more commercial, and so when we haven't had any experience or outreach to that community, because they want to prioritize parking for their customers and also the business owners. And most likely the way that's going to be enforced is probably different with parking meters, like a lot of other commercial people do. But I don't know, so that would be a little different. I mean, the community park, there's houses around there. There's also houses in the visitation home. There's actually some of those houses are mixed use, where they could have a house on the top and business. So I guess technically we could do that. I'm fine with that.
It's just the starting point.
All right. Let's get that in that is great. I feel like, wow, we've gotten one off the list, sort of. But can we make sure we get that in the minutes like that, Karen? Darius, yes.
Actually, I think one other thing we probably may already have a consensus on, or at least a very strong opinion in this list, if we can scroll down, would be sort of the enforcement. I think that's something we've heard quite a lot about, that there just isn't the capacity for Brisbane to have enforcement of our own from the police department. I don't know if everyone else has thought about that. That was one section where I felt, the other option is contracting or enforcement internally, right? And so that's something else that I think it's pretty clear that we don't have the capacity from the people we've talked to internally to do that, unless we levy some sort of, or unless we can get resources for that. Any other thoughts from the committee on that? That seems like one of those issues where it's either this way or this way. So maybe we can come to sort of an earlier consensus there. Or is that, do you think, jumping the gun perhaps?
I think it's kind of jumping the gun. I'd like, if with all due respect, I know that I think I agree with you. We probably do all agree that it should be contracted out. But I'd like us to try, we have about 30 minutes left in tonight's meeting, if we, 30 plus or so. I'd like us to see, a really big question is, Tomas, can you scroll up? Is the question of how many permits get issued? And I think that's just a really giant elephant eating an elephant type of a problem to figure out, okay? And I'd like us to try and start on that tonight if we could, if that's all right. And we may get through it, we may not, but at least we get the discussion started, because I think this is one that is really hard to come to a clear, good single plan on. Does that sound okay? Is that okay? So let's move on to that, the number of permits to be issued. And we talked about this last week or last month, and there are so many factors that come into this. Should it be a set number per resident, per dwelling unit? Do you include ADUs or not? If it is a fixed number, how many is it going to be? This is independent of how we might charge for it or recommend that it be charged for. And then do we then factor in the capacity of each street? So some streets have less parking, on-street parking available. Do we give that block less permits? These are all difficult questions to answer. And so I'd like to start with just going around and getting everyone's thoughts on this. And if anyone wants to jump in first and take a bite.
I'm still
Yes,
on
Linda?
elephant eating elephant, and that's what it feels like. If we're going to have a no zone area, one zone rather, then someone who has a parking permit on a street that has really tight parking. When we did our study, I know Mariposa Street on the 100 block was parked from one end to the other end on the corners. I'm not really sure who parked there or what their reason was or how many garages weren't used. But if that was all residents, then they would probably need to park on another street. And I think where I'm trying to go with this is that let me come back to it again. I get 5 thoughts in my head, and by the time I get to the third one, it's like, where was I going? I'm having one of those days. So I think that it really depends on the need and the use. If you can't park in your driveway, then you should be applying for a permit. And how many you can apply for would probably depend on counting parking spaces in town to see how many we can actually allocate to the town. Because we don't have that information.
Oh, okay. Tomas, were you going to look, just a moment, Darius. Tomas, were you going to look at that? To try and find, I thought Justin may have done some work on that before with Google Maps or something.
Yeah, and when I started doing the research for that, I looked online, was the first thing I looked at, and obviously there's a bunch of different resources and like a lot of conflicting data and strategies for doing that. So I actually reached out to Justin personally, and he basically just explained his methodology to me of how they performed that count. And so I mean,
Okay.
it was a really long email, but the main point of it was that they went out there and they counted license plates, and they kind of tracked how long it was there to get a sense of if that car was someone who was a resident, not just a visitor. And then from there, they gained a better idea of how many cars were, or what the street capacity was. So, I mean, yeah, I have a strategy, and he explained it to me.
Okay.
And if it came to applying that, I could definitely just do what he did before to keep it consistent as well.
I don't think that was ever
So
really.
it takes a on-the-ground survey.
Yeah.
Sorry? Okay. I'm sorry, who was talking?
I'm
interrupted?
sorry, it
Linda.
was me. We participated in that study. And I didn't know that it had gone beyond just that part of the study. That we had an actual count of the number of parking places. We can't possibly issue more than we have. And the idea of striping the parking places so that they're properly used, so that every space, if someone parks to protect their bumper front and back and hogs up 3 spaces, that's not helpful. So we need to look at what we actually have and perhaps consider marking them so that they're properly used. I know down at the park, across from Gregory, very often there's 3 or 4 or 5 parking places that could have been available but aren't because of the way people park. So I think we need to go back a step and take a look at how much do we have to give, and then figure out how do we divvy it up.
Okay.
Patrick, can I?
Okay, thank you,
Add
Linda.
something?
Daria's,
Oh, so I was going to say, can I add something?
Karen, go ahead.
I wanted to elaborate a little bit on what
Yes.
Justin said that he did. So, and I thought he did share it with the committee. So the subcommittee at the time surveyed 6 segments, 6 blocks, different randomly selected blocks. And he went on Google Street View and used a Caltrans standard of 20 feet and simply measured the space between curb cuts. And all he had in the file was a list that said 100 block Mariposa, 16 spaces or whatever it was, 16, 17. So then the email kind of illuminated that a little bit more. He said they were kind of trying to qualitatively see if there were cars that were people that lived in the neighborhood versus ones that were turning over. So maybe that was part of the discussion at some point, but it would be block by block to know what the capacity is. And then, I don't want to interject in what you guys are doing. It's going great, I think, but we talked about this at City Hall because there was a problem with the parking lot and there was some storage of some of the fleet vehicles at City Hall, and they were going to issue 20 permits for the 20 spaces on the street. And I made the point, what if people are sick? What if people are out of town? Then you've got spaces that can't be used necessarily. So I don't know. And I don't know if some of the other examples they issue actually more than there are spaces on the street. And it'd be hard to get it exactly right where you only issue as many permits as there are spaces on the street or people own cars. Some of it is a little bit like The permit doesn't guarantee you a space. It just lets you, if you find one, stay those number of hours that the permit is enforced for. Because I don't know if you want to leave a space empty, you go out of town and you take your car with you, you know? So that's another
Right.
factor to think about. But I guess you guys are still talking about whether you want capacity on the street to be a factor in how many permits you issue versus parking on people's property on site, or a fixed number just per household or address, and whether ADUs are part of that or not. So it would be a bit of work to go and count every space on the street. And then in my opinion, you have different sized cars. I think, we did have tick marks at City Hall, and if you've got a smart car, you're not utilizing a lot of that space there on the street. That's kind of a benefit in a big city. Like, I had a Mini Cooper, I could park in that smaller space that other people couldn't fit in, So if you mark it, then you limit some of that. A 20-foot space will fit a big truck, but it might fit like 2 smart cars or a couple motorcycles in a car,
Maybe we can mark on the parking place 2 Mini Coopers or a large truck may park here.
That's another way, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Darius, you've been patiently waiting.
To be fair, Christian was ahead of me, so go ahead, Christian. You also had your hand up for a while. Go for it.
Oh, okay, I didn't see that one. Sorry.
So, no problem. So I think that one of the, was, I guess at the beginning, I was a big, I was a big advocate for getting some sort of readout on the street capacities, go street by street and try to be as much as equitable as possible. But now that, with this, having the whole central Brisbane being one big zone, and also from a lot of the cities, what they did, they just had X number of parking, and they didn't seem like they were, getting technical about measuring how many cars can they, can the street accommodate, and therefore we're going to issue X amount of number of parking permits. So at this point, I'm thinking more like Karen that, okay, so we have, central Brisbane, we all gotta sort of like we are all in this ship, and we all need to figure out how we're going to, make it work. So as standardized as much as possible, and especially, as we go with this questionnaire, and then I'm sure it could be refined eventually. But my guess would be just to work on some logical points. Like, for instance, that in a household you're going to have at least 2 cars or 2 people that are going to drive. So why don't we issue 2 permit parkings for 2 cars, and then we could, and that could probably even be free, and then you could sell 2 more to have a maximum of 4. And one of the reasons I'm thinking, issue 2 permit per car is because a lot of people are going to park in front of their driveway. So that's a given. Even if you have a parking permit, you cannot park on somebody else's driveway, right? And then the other car almost become as default, because at the end of the day, you want to park in front of your house, and that is a lot of the culture of Brisbane, at least on the street I live. A lot of the people here, they park in front of the house, and they make it work. They park one car, like they back it up, the other one they put it parallel, and if they have another third car, either they get a small car, but at the end of the day, they make things work. So, that's one way to look at it. But then if you have like kids and stuff like that, then you could purchase, additional parking permits, and they could go park where there's parking, visitation, or somewhere else.
Thank you,
So that-
Christian. Darius?
Actually, Christian, I agree with a lot of the points you made there. So the way I kind of pushed this section, I went through and ranked them. I did have a comment that I do agree that we should know sort of the maximum number of spaces allowed in the city and not exceed some, percentage of that or something. But I did feel quite strongly when I was going through this list that we should go by some fixed number. So I had, in terms of the different options listed here, I kind of thought that I preferred the most a fixed number per household regarding of on-site or street parking capacity. So just sort of every household gets 2, for instance. So I thought personally, and I thought 2 was a fair number per address. But then that, if there are more registered drivers, if we're going to only get to sort of, drivers or registered vehicles in the city, then I thought maybe they could get additional permits. Or you have something like, if it's a single individual who has multiple cars, perhaps we charge more for the second permit per vehicle or some, household capacity, and then you increase it to 2x or 1.5x, depending on the cost, if it's going to be whatever the cost, if there's a cost associated. And then I thought the second one I liked was sort of a max permit as relates to dwelling units. So, household versus dwelling units, that's sort of a thing. And then I thought, yeah, sort of going down the list, and my least favorite was sort of going site by site and figuring out capacity, because I think that is so intensive, especially if you go with a single zone. I think sort of a fixed number per household, seemed to be a pretty common way of doing things and something that I would support.
Okay. Thank you.
Good point.
Gregory, I know you're seeing this for the first time, but do you have any thoughts on what we're
Yeah,
looking at?
absolutely. Yeah. So I actually did like what Christian just said in terms of because one thing that popped in my head as we were discussing just now was, maybe we increase the cost of the permits for each additional vehicle. But then I also liked what Christian said, thinking about equity and inclusion. Maybe we make the first 2 per household free or very, very low cost. And then past that, like if they want a third one or a fourth one, then the cost is increased to do that. Because, if you think about it,
Okay.
you're kind of using it as, if you have 4 cars on the street for one household, that you're taking up someone else's space in some ways, but by kind of, I don't want to say necessarily it's a fine, it's not a fine, but the increasing that price will give that incentive of maybe you don't want to have 4 cars parked on the street. Maybe keep it to just those 2, try to encourage less vehicles, parking on the street. So I kind of liked Christian's idea on that one.
Yeah.
And I think the percentage as well. I don't think we can necessarily limit it to the number of parking spaces, but maybe we do the total number of parking spaces within central Brisbane plus 10, like 100 in terms of the total number of permits. Then past that point, maybe we create a wait list. So as a thought. So if we get to that full capacity, right, of 110 or 120% of permits handed out, maybe we say, okay, well, there's all these permits are handed out, but we'll put you on a wait list. So next year, if the person doesn't renew their permit, then you can get, your permit for additional. Just something that popped up in my brain as talks.
Gregory, in
All right. Thank you. Linda?
in response to that, it's like, what does that mean if someone moves into town who does not have a permit into an ADU that's added, or if we require it for an ADU or any car that's on the street? Does that mean they don't get a permit at all until there's one on the waiting list? And what do they do in the meantime?
Well, that's a good thought. Interesting thought too. I wonder if there's some way that we could know. I mean, like if, for example, someone moves in, or if there are additional dwellings that get added, through the construction or permit process, anyways, that we have, if they're adding additional rooms, or like, for example, we could also say, okay, say it's a max capacity already, and there's a waiting list. Maybe we say, okay, show us your new lease agreement, or your, or just show some evidence to show that you are the new owner of that unit, and so maybe that's hard though, because then what do you do with the old owners who might still have their permits that are valid for that year?
Right.
Do you
I-
revoke those
Darius
old
was
ones?
mentioning, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Darius say something about um, figuring out how many parking places there are and going less than 100% in?
Yeah. I was thinking sort of along the lines for guests and allowing for visitors and sort of lowering the capacity perhaps, but you know, I think we should know if we're over or whatnot. I guess, yeah.
The answer is somewhere there in the middle. Because if, for example, someone new moves in and the capacity has been reached, there's no wiggle room. And if we had some wiggle room with it being less than 100% or 110% of our passes being given out, I don't know, there's just some place somewhere here where we need to kind of fine tune this so that it works for everyone and their visitors and their grandmother. So I appreciate what both of you have to say. It's a really interesting discussion. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Christian, your hand is up? Yes?
Yeah, no, I mean, those are very good points. And this actually reminds me of some of the ideas, you know, that were bounced at the beginning when they did the studies. And we have to think about that we're not going to, the permit, you know, parking program is not a silver bullet. Okay. And I remember at the beginning, there were conversations about, as a matter of fact, I think the parking lot is for sale right now. I want a visitation. And the city ended up buying the Bank of America. But at one point, the city needs to realize, okay, we're over capacity of parking. What can we do to create more parking? Because, you know, they collect taxes. And as a citizen, they need to provide essential services for their citizens. So they could either think about having a structure in central Brisbane, like the one of Visitation, and accommodate 30 or 50 parking spaces, and maybe in one of those cliff or alleys that we, you know, survey for walkways, they could do another parking space up there. And the one here in Visitation could also be a way to generate money when they do events in the community parking, that you have all those cars parked along the street, you know, and it's a little winky to drive around them, you know. So what I'm saying is that that could be another way to, you know, try to bring a solution to this parking, you know, overflow parking capacity that we're experiencing.
Thank you, Christian. Linda?
In response to Christian's comments, which are well made, I'm not sure that the city is required to provide parking for anybody. Parking is a problem that we're dealing with, but I think as far as it being the city's responsibility to create parking, I'm not sure that's true. I don't think there's anything in the law to substantiate that. I do think that it, you know, as a problem.
Well, I think new buildings have to have parking, right?
New
have
buildings
a parking
have to have
requirement.
their own provide their own parking. It's not
Yes,
something
yes.
provided by the city.
Yes.
I think I'm tired. I think it's something we need to pull back on, not and just do the job that we've been asked to do and try to bring up maybe alternate solutions.
Yeah, I mean, to answer to your question,
Darius,
Linda,
thank you.
Yeah, I was going to comment. Actually, I think something was brought up today that I hadn't considered before today, and I want to make sure to sort of noted and maybe think about some more is the redrawing of like some of the lines. 'Cause I think that on my street, especially on Alvarado, is there are no street lines and no sort of indications of what a parking spot is. I know that maybe 20 feet is not the right number. Maybe we can think about that some more. But I think that might be interesting because it's not something I thought about. But often I see one car taking up 2 spots and sort of
Exactly.
no consideration almost. And of course, we have to
Yeah.
make sure we don't go in for people's driveways and all that. But it's something that I think would be worth thinking about some more, and maybe as a possible solution, as a minimal solution at least.
I agree.
Christian? Thank you, Darius. Thank you, Linda.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess what I wanted to emphasize was that we got it. I mean, that idea of the parking lot was, discussed at the beginning when they did the study, and I thought it was a good one. And what I wanted to encourage is, as with any problem, you have to think out of the box and bring a solution. I mean, if we do have, houses are getting smaller and the land is not going to expand. What's going to expand? What's going to happen is places are getting more dense. So there has to be a way to figure out how you're going to allocate, that growth. So that's one way to look at it. Parking permit is going to cost money. So if you look at the feasibility of, implementing a parking permit versus also maybe getting a lot and, fix it to we could park cars, that's an alternative. And in terms of if it's a city responsibility or not, that's a legal thing, and I'd rather withdraw from that. But all I'm saying is we got to, think out of the box.
I agree. And
Thank you,
maybe
Christian.
more stringent requirements by the planning department about parking, adding parking, designing buildings so that there's adequate parking off the street. Might be part of something that plays into this too. I know the new library has no parking, and that was a critical mistake in my
Right.
opinion. So
Yes.
those are the kinds of things that we
And a
can see.
planter that took one spot away.
Yeah. So we need to kind of be futuristic about this, and there really aren't that many lots left to build in Brisbane. We're about maxed out. So
Yeah.
it probably won't make a big difference, but if there are lots left, if there are new buildings or buildings being torn down and rebuilt, then it's something that might be part of this recommendation when we're done with it, to require additional parking. It's just not out there. So that's all.
Thank you. I think let's try and bring this topic to a close. I've got about 5 minutes till we have a couple of other items to go through on the agenda. And we'll pick this up again next month, number of permits issues. But I haven't said anything yet. I've been listening to everyone. I just want to add a couple comments before we close out the night, if I could. I agree with Christian's thoughts on maybe the first two are free, or then start charging, or I think it was, I forget if it was Gregory or Darius who said maybe you have an increasing cost per car. Something along those lines, I think, is probably a good idea, because when this gets rolled out, it's a very big change for the public. Everybody has got to go get a permit, and then all of a sudden you've got to have permits, and if you've got to shell out, we should try and make it as painless as possible for the existing public. That said, how do we determine how many permits a dwelling should get? And I still have not, my thoughts on this are very fuzzy at the moment, but here are the things that are going through my mind. right now, the system as it is does work. It's messy, it's frustrating for the last person to arrive at night looking for a parking space or the last 10 people in the neighborhood. But it does work. At the end of the day, all the cars do get parked, which means somehow, some way, we are close to balanced in terms of number of parking spaces and the number of cars we have. Now, which means to me, maybe, and I'm not proposing this, I'm just speaking out loud things that are going through my mind. Maybe on the first go round, we set the number of permits for kind of a large number to allow for what everybody has right now, so that if somebody, you know, if a household has got 2 kids in college and 2 working adults and 2 kids in college or whatever, and so there are 4 cars, they're not all of a sudden restricted because we said there has to be only 2 cars. You know, it may cost more, but they can still get 4 cars, you know. Whereas another household that has 2 and only wants 2, that's all they need. That's what they get. Again, that's very fuzzy, and I don't want to try and lock anyone in on that, but these are just thoughts that are in my mind, because I think this will be disruptive. The devil you don't know is always worse than the devil you do. Okay. And the devil you know is the parking program we have right now at the moment. Good or bad, everybody kind of knows how to work it. And when we put in a permit program, it's going to be another learning curve and an adjustment. Okay. Now, listening to, talking to people in town, listening to council, part of what's identified at least, and the surveys, anecdotally, part of the big problems are people who have an exorbitant number of cars, multiple cars, maybe they're a car collector or whatever, but they are parked on the street. They may not be operated or moved for weeks on end. That kind of irks people. And the question that comes up is, does that need to be parked here? Or could that be off somewhere else in storage somewhere, even outside the city? Why does it have to be parked on a city street? Person is a collector and has 5, 6, one person has 5, 6 cars, whatever. Great hobby, but that's taking up parking spaces of people that do have to move, have to go to work every day. Another concern that everyone raised was, or that many people have raised, is the full garaging. People who have a garage, that there's space that could be used for parking, but is filled with stuff. And now that's a conscious decision. And I think listening to council's debating of this on that meeting when they sent it back to us was something on a program that would get those people to get that stuff out of that garage, get their car in the garage, and then by doing that, that frees up a space on the street. And so all of a sudden, by having a parking program, a permit program, we can change the status quo by forcing people or incentivizing people financially or towing their car to free up a garage space or a driveway space or 2 spaces or whatever. So, you know, these are all things that I think juggle. Something else that comes to mind is when we were surveying one of the houses, and I don't remember which street it's on, it had a 2-car garage. And I remember the night we went out together, we stood out in front of it. It had a fence in the front and a gate on the driveway. And we counted and how many cars they could get in the front yard. It was like 5 or 6 cars. I mean, it was just this humongous front yard, which is great, but okay. So maybe a house like that gets no permit, right? I mean, these are ways maybe that we have to think about it.
That was a very crowded street too.
Some of the houses have garage. What's that?
That was a very crowded street. I remember that house.
That's right. Some houses have garages which cannot be used because of whatever's been retroactively built in the garage, heating systems or living quarters or whatever. So there may be a garage there, but it is physically incapable of holding a car. So in which case we can't count that as a car space, right? Those people can't get that car off the street. So there's a lot of factors on this. Unless anybody has anything else to add tonight, I'd like to table it at this point, move on to our other agenda items, and come back to this next month. Any other comments or? Okay, let's
Can
move
I
on
get
in
a
the
copy of
agenda then.
this? Excuse me? Can we get a copy of
Yes,
what's on the screen right now? Because I think it's different from what we had before.
yeah.
Yeah, I'll send it out.
It's a
Thank
different order, but the same point. Yeah.
Right.
Tomas, can you send that out to us, please?
Yeah, for
Put it
sure.
in the SharePoint also, I guess.
Yeah,
Thank you.
and maybe email it to everyone too, just to be sure.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Is there any new business that we should address tonight? Okay, staff updates. Karen?
I don't have a lot. We are most recently looking at another grant opportunity from the San Mateo County Transportation Authority, and it's a bike ped grant. They've just issued the call for projects, and Tomas is going to do the webinar tomorrow about it. So I haven't looked at it closely. I saw some mention of transit, but we were thinking that because the city had, when COVID started, unfunded to Larry to Santa Clara, that might be a good project to apply for. But if the guidelines say transit or schools, we also talked about the pathway from San Francisco Avenue down to Bayshore and Old County. So that might be a good one. I think that because you guys kind of fall in between, we haven't had a chance to really nail one down, but I think we will probably come to the next meeting hoping to get a letter of support for one of those two.
Great.
That's the biggest one I have. I don't know, Tomas, if you have any. We do MTC puts out a grant, PTAP standing for, I can't even think of it right now, but they help fund pavement condition, pavement management software, or operation of it, and inventory of the streets. And we're required to have that to get the funding that we get from the region for pavement maintenance, to get our gas tax and Measure funds. So we've got a consultant that's going to be doing that, and we'll see them in August. We tend to put stuff out in social media, but we don't get a lot of comments. I guess they look official when they're out doing those surveys. So Tomas is kind of working with that consultant and other ongoing pavement maintenance. We had told you last meeting that we got awarded on the Crocker Park shuttle stop improvements. That's still just going to the TA board.
Yeah.
So we're hoping to be able to build those next year, but looking at how long that first shelter took to get, 6 months from order. Cross my fingers that we can be installing stuff next year. We can probably at least be doing the flat work and the more simpler pieces.
Great.
And
Fantastic.
Tomas, do you have anything
Thank
you want
you.
to update on?
Yep.
No, I was just going to talk about the pedestrian and bike grant as well. So that's all.
Committee members, do you have any updates or matters that you want to add? Karen? And Linda?
I do actually. I wanted to let everyone know I ran into Justin yesterday. And it was delightful to see him.
Wow.
He was at the police night out, and he came by to visit everyone, and he asked about you all, and that was great. That's all.
Great. We're going to get him back yet. He's going to move here or something. Anyone else? Darius?
Yeah, I got a question. I know this came up a couple of weeks ago, or a couple meetings ago. Is there any update in terms of City Hall or just broader plans to have in-person meetings again, or is that sort of going to be, a while still, or is there
that's-
any sort of
Question I
Thoughts on
have
that?
too.
That's a good question. And I think I have to say, at this point, I'm not sure because I know that the council is, I saw a draft agenda that I think is going to go public at the end of the week for another meeting to extend the resolution to meet remotely because the council is on hiatus until September. They take a little summer recess. So I wouldn't expect any action to change that in any way, especially, oh, it's tomorrow night. He's right. I'm sorry. So I guess the agenda must already be out that they're meeting tomorrow night to extend the remote meeting. A local agency has to say, we still for safety issues want to continue to meet remotely under the governor order. So we're doing that. And I would think that there's not going to be any significant change until after the council can meet again in September. I don't know if you guys are seeing other cities on the peninsula, but as I've said before, Brisbane council and staff are pretty on the conservative end of what others are doing. City Hall is still only open Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, somewhat limited hours, 9 to 4 Monday and Thursday, 9 to 7 on Wednesday. So we're not even back to being open full time, the public. And, the news is changing all the time. So I don't know if people, we had set up to be able to do hybrid meetings. So that would mean that we would have to open the council chambers and that could be a Zoom screen. So people could be there. The community meeting room, council chambers. People could either be sitting there at the dais or they could be at home and the public could actually come and physically be at the community meeting room to participate. So if I had to guess, I would think that would be a first step before we came back to fully meeting.
Thank you. Any other matters for the committee? I have a couple questions then for you, Karen. Is there an update on the Crocker Trail improvement? It's been a couple of years now since we had the task force and all of that, and we have the grant, right?
Yeah, we're kind of, I was thinking about updating on that, but I didn't, there's a lot of expectation around it. So it was funded for us, meaning the federal grant, the regional One Bay Area grant is federally funded, and there's a cycle every, I think it's 3 years. So we got money in cycle 2, and they're just took applications for the next cycle. So they fund some projects the first year, some the second year, some that third year. So ours is funded for the coming federal fiscal year. And we have completed the environmental studies. We had to do, and I don't know if you guys knew the details of this. We asked council to support because we didn't know we'd need these certain studies. We had to do an archaeological study and we had to do a hazardous materials study. And then we were going through NEPA because it's federal funds. So we got that approved a number of months ago. And then we did a CEQA, again, a notice of exemption. We just turned in our right-of-way. We certified that we're working all within our right-of-way, and we need to get that approved by a different division of Caltrans because Caltrans administers federal funding, so we work with them directly versus the federal government directly. And then we'll submit the full plans, specifications and estimate in the documents saying, we're ready, will you give us construction funding? So right now, Tomas, not as we speak, but even these current days is trying to develop the plans. We're putting the plans and specifications together so we can submit that in November. It'll get reviewed through the winter, and we expect to put it out to bid in winter, spring, and be building it next summer. Everything goes well.
Okay. Great. That sounds good. The other question I had is along Valley Drive, where the Crocker Trail crosses Valley Drive, there's a pedestrian refuge in the middle of the 4-lane street that's been under construction or under reconstruction for a really long time, and it seems to have stalled. So that they re-poured a pad and then started putting up some of the guard fences, but the guard fences have never been finished. I was wondering what's going on there.
Was that a repair, or I'm not even sure what you mean in terms of if it was a kind of a maintenance activity, I may not necessarily know the details of it. Was there one there before, or it's a whole new location?
It looks like there was one there before. And it started while I was out of town, and I came back and I noticed, gee, that's new concrete curbing and such. And then at first, when I first came back, that was in June, there was just new concrete curb kind of delineating the rectangle box in the middle. And of course, the guard fencing was gone. And now, I'd say last month, 2 sides of galvanized fencing have gone up, new fencing. But the other 2 sides have not. So I'm just kind of wondering what's happening with that.
What's the?
It looked more than
location?
maintenance. It looked like more like a rebuild.
Unless it
What's
got hit by a vehicle or something, it might be maintenance. What locate? Is it the one that's?
It may have gotten hit.
by
I was out of town.
Is it the one by Trove, or is there another one? Like,
Yes.
on the
No, it's the one
east
up by
end.
Trove. That's where the Crocker Trail crosses. Yeah, it's not the one in front of City Hall. It's the other one further up the road.
yeah, I'll have to check and get back to you because I don't think I was told about that. So it might have been damaged. It's possible.
Uh-huh.
I will
Okay.
find out. Does everybody want to get
Okay.
that email when I find out, or?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
can-
send it to everybody. It's kind of, it is a safety, it's there for safety, So,
And
okay.
yeah, those
thank you.
could be
Anything
good staff
else?
updates. Let me just
Sorry.
mention too that this chair and committee member matters. I mean, we're working on the parking stuff directly, and primarily, but just for the 2 new members, this is the place. I think the council has a similar thing on the agenda. Open Space has something on their agenda where members can bring up something that they'd like to see agendized in the future, but you either need the chair or a majority to say, yeah, that's something we need to put on the agenda. Kind of its function, this item.
Okay. So bring the things you see around town. I mean, we've worked on a lot of projects that way. Gregory, you've seen a lot, it sounds like. Okay, if there's nothing else, our next meeting is September 7th, next month. And could I then have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Okay. Gregory,
A
second.
second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Hi.
Aye. Okay.
Good night.
Thank you very much,
Good night.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good
Good night.
meeting.
Good night.
Appreciate it. Go through the